G'day folks, Jordan here. In this software overview video, we're taking a look at Kubuntu 6.06 LTS Dapper Drake, released on the 1st of June 2006. Let's get into it. Kubuntu 6.06, and for that matter its higher up brethren, Ubuntu 6.06, is significant in that it is the very first long-term support release of the operating system ever since its inception. It's also, funnily enough, given the nickname late to ship, given the LTS moniker, and the fact that the OS was delayed from its initial 6.04 release to 6.06, and being formally released on the 1st of June 2006. So we all remember that to this day, but still, it is very significant that a long-term support version of this operating system is released and regularly updated with security and compatibility updates to ensure stability as well as compatibility for many years. Now, interestingly, despite the LTS moniker, it does not have the same support cycle as modern LTS releases of Ubuntu and Kubuntu and vice versa. Back in these days, the support cycle was actually 3 years for desktop computers and 5 years for servers, whereas nowadays the same support cycle is for both server and desktop computers at 5 years, and then of course 5 years for paid extended security updates if you are an Advantage customer in the case of Ubuntu, so go figure, of course. But back in the day, it was 3 years for desktop, which means that the official end of life for 6.06 LTS Dapper Drake was the 1st of June 2009 for PCs and the 1st of June 2011 for servers. So quite a decent support cycle for this version of Ubuntu Linux. Now, in case anybody was also curious, there was a 6.06.1 update, which is basically a culmination of updates and other packages and changes that was released on the 10th of August 2006, but was compiled on the 8th of August 2006 and uploaded to their FTP server. So most likely, if you're going to download this OS, be sure you get the .1 release. Now, if you're wondering why there wasn't a .2 or .3 release, well, for one thing, that didn't exist for the desktop versions, but I believe the only time you ever saw a .2 release of 6.06, .2 was for server, because that was what I was able to find anyway. So I could be wrong, there might be other versions, but officially, as far as I can tell, it was only a .1 update on top of the initial release. So let's briefly talk about some of the changes that were significant with the 6.06 release. First of which being that, and this was the case for all Ubuntu derivatives that were based on 6.06 LTS, there was a new feature being that the live CD and installation media, which used to be separate ISO images downloadable from the website, they were now bundled into just one ISO. So you could just download the standard desktop edition of whatever distro of Ubuntu you wanted, and at that point, you could just boot it. It would boot into a graphical user interface, and you could use the then also new Ubiquiti installer, which is graphical in nature, to install your operating system to your computer. These were both big changes because previously, as you might have seen on my Ubuntu series, the installation processes were all in text mode. And while that was fine, because at that time even Windows, which in that case was Windows XP, still used a text-based installer as well, although that was only for the initial part of the setup. Of course, the later half was graphical in nature. Same thing goes for something like Windows 2000 or whatever have you. But in the case of Ubuntu Linux, at 6.06, it was actually graphical in nature. From the boot up being a complete desktop experience you could try before you install, as they so called it, to, actually being able to install the operating system, it was completely graphical. So that was pretty revolutionary for the Linux community, or, well, really actually just the Ubuntu Linux community. But nevertheless, that is still something nice to have, and something that they obviously still do today. At this time also, they had netboot support, which allowed you to boot Kubuntu over a PXE boot connection. Don't know how you're to set that up. I've never done the research, but I know that that support does exist in this release. I believe this was the first one to do that. Interestingly also, with this release of Ubuntu, there was a new service known as ShipIt. And what ShipIt would do is if you signed up and, gave a bit of a, I think it was just you asked for it or something initially, you would actually get a copy of the installation medium on a CD shipped right to your door. It was actually pretty revolutionary at the time because Normally you'd have to pay for something like that, but no. Canonical actually was pretty smart about this, and the same thing applied for Kubuntu. You could register to receive a free CD containing Kubuntu installation media. This took place well into the late 2000s, but of course, unfortunately, was discontinued in 2011 shortly before the release of Ubuntu 11.04. So, yeah, just thought I'd mention that because I think there was actually the ship it service launching with 6.06, because in prior snapshots of the website, I have not seen the ship it link anywhere. So take it for what you will, I believe it was launched with this release. Getting into some of the more specific changes, KDE 3.5.2 was in this version of Kubuntu, and visually it doesn't look too different, but the initial splash screen looks a little different, which you will soon see. There is also a new Adept notifier system with the simplified installer, and I believe this just meant that the Adept package manager system was a little bit more simple to use as far as I can tell from my notes, so it had a better installation process and vice versa. There was also a new X display configuration from the guidance configuration tools, which I believe was all baked into the operating system. So basically, you could configure what the X window server would start up in by default, depending on your computer's configuration. In addition, there is also better Asian language support, so that's always good to see, although I don't speak the language, but for those who do, that's always a nice improvement to have. And on top of that, there was new Avahi, I think that's how you pronounce that, networking software. So, good stuff to have. And some of the Ubuntu-specific changes with this release, which obviously I mentioned before, this is a long-term support release, which makes sense. There was another change that allowed Usplash to run on shutdown, which if you saw in 5.10, that was not the case. It just went back to text mode. But in 6.06, the same Usplash splash screen that you see on the boot up of the operating system is also applied on the shutdown. So you get to see the same logo at both startup and shutdown, which is pretty nice. And unofficially, you can actually put this ISO onto a flash drive, a USB flash drive, through a program called Rufus, or you could also use Universal USB Installer, I believe. And this would allow you to boot the operating system from a USB flash drive and also install it to a USB flash drive. Although the latter half, being that you could install this to a USB flash drive, is actually officially noted, but the unofficial part being that you can actually put this ISO onto a USB flash drive and boot it just fine without any issues. Or at least in my testing with the Dell Latitude D600, that was the case, which is nice to see. So besides that, here's the website. There's nothing really too fancy about it that I can tell that's really worth taking a look at. You can get a bit of an idea as to the look of the Ubiquity desktop installer, which as you can see, as I mentioned, it is graphical in nature. This would be something that you would see when you boot the CD in your computer and go to install the operating system to the hard drive. You would see exactly this. And it boots up into this live environment, very similar to that of what you would see when you install to the hard drive and boot it up. And you'd also have different icons for representing for your folders and your install program. Taking a look at the Adept installer, as you can hopefully tell soon when we load up this image, you can see that it is much easier to understand what you are selecting to install, and it has description panes off to the side, icons if it so supports them, and overall the interface is quite a bit better. So this was a big improvement over the previously used Adept Package Manager. Definitely will give them that. And of course, I believe there was also some differences if you were to stick the Kubuntu in this case CD into the Windows computer. As you can see, they have this program called Scribus, which it looks like it's something similar to that of like a Microsoft Publisher or maybe Adobe InDesign, maybe something similar to that effect. And I believe Kexi, I forget which one that one was. I don't know if that was the database program or whatever have you. But KDE PIM, that was your personal information manager, so that I believe included your calendar and email and stuff like that. So, very nice to see. So you can try the Windows equivalent of those programs if you so desired. Or at least that's how it used to be. Of course, one of the major things that is always good with any Ubuntu, or for that matter Linux release, not even just Ubuntu, is documentation. They also improved that. I didn't mention that because, well, let's just face it, this is an over 14-year-old version of Linux at this point. Well, it would have been if it was released on 6.04, but it's close enough that for the context of this video, it's close enough. So, whatever. What's also nice is that if you had the server version, you could still run this on HP's PA RISC systems, and I believe there was also, I'd have to look at the page again, but there was a bunch of different architectures, very similar to the support that you might have seen on like Windows NT, where you had HP, PA RISC, ARM. I don't know if ARM was on the list, but I know for NT it was. And then obviously PowerPC was there previously, so that obviously makes sense. You all can look at that if you so desired. So, with that having been shown, we'll go ahead and close out of this. Fortunately, I was able to get this to work in a virtual machine for today's video. So, let's take a look at Kubuntu 6.06 LTS. Alright, let's go full screen with this. Alright, cool, VMware Tools is working. So here we are at the desktop of a clean install of Kubuntu 6.06 LTS. As you can see, the wallpaper no longer has the Kubuntu logo by default. This is the default wallpaper of the operating system. And I'll even show it to you. It even mentions Kubuntu wallpaper. And I believe there are quite a large number of wallpapers that you can pick from in this release. I'll even make the preview pane just a little bit bigger so you can actually take a look at some of them here. I believe this one is unique to this operating system, this Alta Beta. I believe this stuck through all the way till Kubuntu 8.04, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, actually, we could probably set that, because that actually looks really nice. The only problem is, of course, you have to change this positioning thing so that way it'll actually kind of sort of fill the screen. Kind of like Windows 7 did. Alright, that looks quite a bit better. Some of the other ones, let's see if we can find some other ones here. Blue Bend is also from basically even the original. You can also still set SVGZ files as desktop wallpapers, if I'm not mistaken. So let's go ahead and set this here. So this is Celtic, which, as you can see, I believe the KDE logo down here at the bottom is actually part of the SVG. So if you change the screen resolution of the file or aspect ratio or whatever have you, that KDE logo would basically stay the same dimensions, only the background would change resolution, or something to that nature. They are customizable as per usual. Then here's a funny one. Here is the Debian wallpaper, because I believe obviously at that time Debian also used the K-desktop environment as one of its options, and it still does to this day. I believe you can still use KDE Plasma with a clean install of Debian. Floating Leaves. There's Globe, which I believe this was 5.10. No, that was a different one. I thought... anyways. Interestingly, this file is called KDE34.png, but it's actually labeled KDE 3.5. So, the typical KDE Globe wallpaper. Of course, this, like I mentioned, uses KDE 3.5.2. So here's a pretty nice one. Soft green. You know what? For the rest of this video, let's leave this one, because I actually really like this one and its looks. So as you can see, this bar down here is different looking, has new icons, it has a new drop shadow, and the sidebar no longer shows the version number, or at least in this case, it no longer shows the version number. So it just has a clean look that just says Kubuntu on it. So that's pretty nice. And as you can see, the categories are very similar to before. I'm not entirely sure if there's any major differences, but to my eyes, basically the icons are a little bit different, but otherwise the same. So we'll go ahead and we'll hop into system settings here. And one thing I forgot to mention is that the theme is a little bit different. In addition, this was also the case with Ubuntu 6.06. It also got a refreshed color scheme, whereas this one has different looking buttons that are more reflective, more stylized, and it's more blue, or at least in this case it's more blue, and again, more reflective and stylized. Some of these icons I think have been changed. They're, again, a little bit more stylized, but I couldn't tell you the difference exactly off the top of my head because I replaced my 5.10 VM, but I know for a fact that the sound and multimedia icons, or at least some of them, are the same. So that's certainly something different. So why don't we take a look at the Adept installer. I believe that's under System, So we'll go to adept. I gotta type my password because obviously you have to type in your password. And I'm not too familiar with the older adept package manager stuff and how it worked. I believe this is just like a manager. I'm not sure if this actually allows you to do any installing from here. So if I'm not mistaken, if we type in Firefox, okay, here we go. So yeah, you can actually request removal or request installation and that sort of stuff. I actually have fixed the software repositories for this video, so it'll actually pull up whatever the repositories would be for this version of Ubuntu. As you can see, it mentions the installed version of, in this case, Firefox Locale, Great Britain, is 1.5.0.1, so that's pretty interesting. Or maybe it's just 1.5.0 or whatever have you, either way. I don't think that's the actual version of Firefox that would have been on this operating system because it's not even installed, but I guess you kind of get the idea. But let me see, add or remove programs. I wonder if this is that adept installer that I talked about. Okay, yeah, here we go. So this is where you would install your software from. Similar to that of the Ubuntu Software Center when it first launched, although this obviously is the KDE version of something similar to that effect. So, for example, like I mentioned, we'll try Firefox, and we'll see if it loads anything. Looks like it does not, but who's to say? Because I haven't actually run the updates for this operating system to update everything to the latest for the 6.06 release. So it might actually be worth trying. Let's see. I wonder if you'd have to also do that under Adept Package Manager. I wonder if you'd have to install the updates through there. If I'm not mistaken, that's how you would do that. So fetch updates. Okay, good. My modification did work. There's probably going to be a huge laundry list of updates. Oh, yes, there is. We have 290 upgradable packages. Look at that long list. Holy moly. Now that's crazy. So, it might just be worth, if we want to demonstrate the installer, we might just have to do all the updates, do a full upgrade here, and do all that fun stuff. So I think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen recording. I'm going to install all these updates and do a reboot. And we'll see if maybe we can try to install something through the Adept installer. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back after running updates, and now we can go ahead and try installing something. Now that we have all of the latest packages, which I don't know if that really changed too much of anything. We could take a look inside of Conquer, but I don't think that really got changed too much. So yeah, see, we're still on K desktop environment 3.5.2. Normally, the K desktop environment itself is not updated by default, as this is a long-term support release. So generally speaking, anything that is from the initial release, either it gets upgraded with a later long-term support release of that program, or stays the same version, just gets security and bug fixes, which, as you can see, Conquer, or the KDE in this case, is basically that. So, yeah, just something to point out. But I tried to do a search for Firefox earlier. It didn't work, but that's just because I had it set to KDE. Normally, Firefox is part of any suite, and it works with basically anything. So we can go ahead and check the box for this, and we can apply changes. So now we're going to go install Firefox, which, as you can see, looked like version 1.5.0.15. So we'll let this do its thing. Installation is complete. Now we can go back to the program selection. You can see there's the Firefox icon. It's now populated as it is installed. So let's go ahead and uncheck the, empty out the thing there. And there's a bunch of other things that we can install that are not just limited to KDE and may or may not work. So this might be something you can explore on your own time inside a virtual machine if you so wish. You could try installing this on VirtualBox, and maybe it might work, hopefully. I haven't tried it, but something that you could try. Or on actual hardware, that's also a possibility. So let's go under the Internet category. There is the Firefox web browser. So now we can go and open it. As you can see, we got the bouncing Firefox icon, and here you can see about Kubuntu. So this is actually kind of cool that it gives you a little bit of information on the operating system, including the Linux kernel version and all that good stuff. So that's pretty cool. So let's see if I was correct on the Firefox version. 1.5.0. In this case 12, so that's close. As you can see, it gives it EOL, or end of life. So obviously this is the final release for Kubuntu, or Ubuntu 6.06. So yeah, I believe you'd have to install like version 2, but I don't know if that was actually supported on 6.06. I think it may have been, but who's to say? So we should be able to go onto the internet, go to google.com. As you can see, it loads, but obviously this is very similar to an old Firefox, so we're not going to go too crazy with all of that stuff. So there you have it. I hope I didn't really miss too much regarding this video on Kubuntu 6.06 LTS, but if I did, well, I just apologize. Maybe I could do an addendum if it was really popularly requested, but I'm probably not going to do that just for the sake of time and for the sake of I think I got everything for this video. So if you like what you saw, click the like button down below. The other button also seems to work well if you didn't like this video. And if you want to see more content just like this one, or maybe even some better content, there's a button down below with a set of letters that says subscribe. You should probably click on it. It'll help me out quite a bit. And with that having been said, thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next video.